Hi everyone, this is Catherine Kenyon, and I am going to be doing some brief videos on child growth and development, and we're going to start with infants, and so we're off and running. Those were the objectives we talked about. We talked a little bit about ChatGPT. So again, thinking about rates of development, rates of growth. You never grow faster than you do during infancy and adolescence. There are some slower periods of growth that occur during those other stages, and we'll kind of talk through those with each of those particular categories of development. So infancy, again, birth to 12 months, you can see how rapidly that infant changes in both size and appearance and skills. So you can see that that first infant is in sort of what we call a fencing reflex position. And as you watch that infant growing, you can see the hands coming together and hands to mouth and some social smiles. So you can definitely see how this infant has progressed through that first year of life. We talked a little bit about some of those organ system changes, and again, just to highlight, the brain never grows faster than it does between birth and 2 years of age. So measuring head circumference and monitoring growth and development are critical for a successful cognitive as well as physical development. We'll talk when we get to each of the particular categories as far as respiratory and cardiac about some of the differences. Again, GI, important to remember that there is a certain size stomach capacity, which can help in determining how, if infants are having trouble with gastroesophageal reflux or just vomiting, as a way to sort of look at that a little more closely. We also want to talk a little bit about, I mentioned in class about the immune system, and that first 3 months of life, infants have passive immunity of the immunoglobulins from the mother, and therefore any kind of fever or illness can be serious consequences, because they should have immunity, that protective immunity from mom. After that 3 months of age, 3 to 6 months, they have a time frame in which that immune system is trying to develop. So there is certainly a potential for significant episodes or frequent episodes of illnesses. Some growth parameters just to certainly measure or memorize. Weight should double by 6 months of age or so and triple by 12 months of age. As I mentioned, you don't have to memorize the rest of this. However, measuring and looking at infants on a growth curve is really critical. They should track right along on a particular percentile throughout childhood. And so if you see that they are either falling off that particular percentile, going, say, from the 50th to the 10th or the 50th to the 95th, you really want to take a moment to look and see what's going on. We again mentioned breast milk or formula. That's all they need during the first 4 to 6 months of life. And then you can start introducing foods, but again, they should stay on some type of breast milk or formula for the first 6 to 12 months of life for sure. It's the best nutrition for them. Also helps to give them immunity, some passive immunity, and there is some science that's beginning to look at prevention of obesity. Asking the frequency of feedings is helpful to get an idea if an infant is taking in enough formula in a 24-hour period. They should be feeding somewhere, depending on the age, every 2 to 4 hours. And then they should be having somewhere around 6 to 8 wet diapers per day. Again, that's really helpful to sort of have in the back of your brain as you think about dehydration due to a variety of reasons that we'll end up talking about. Formula. Standard formula is 20 calories per ounce, and breast milk has a different caloric concentration, can be somewhere in the 18 calories per ounce, up to 21 calories per ounce. So again, important to just remember that the standard formula is 20 calories per ounce. Basic caloric needs for that first year of life are somewhere around 100 calories per kilo per day, and this is very helpful when we're wanting to assess is an infant actually getting in enough calories to grow. In solid foods, again, should not be introduced until they are at least 4 to 6 months of age, and that has to do with the gut. The gut is not mature. It doesn't have the digestive enzymes necessary for certain types of foods, and actually can cause microhemorrhages in the gut. So that may be something to mention to families when they're pushing to get some rice cereal or some food into their babies early on. In addition, that tongue extrusion, where that tongue forces things out, is a protective reflex, as well as their ability to swallow effectively doesn't really happen till 4 to 6 months of age. And being able to sit unsupported is also very helpful. Able to sit supported, so that they have a little bit of head, neck, and some trunk control is important. We have parents generally start off with rice cereal. That has to do more with food allergies, but that science is changing as we speak. And then we tend to encourage vegetables first, usually the orange vegetables, followed by meats, and finally fruits, simply because of the sugar content. We want the babies to get used to the taste of fruits or vegetables and meats first. By about 8 months of age, most babies can tolerate a variety of textures in their food, although children do have specific texture sensitivities that they just won't eat certain things. Let's move on to some of the developmental theories. Again, I didn't spend a lot of time, and I won't spend a lot of time on Freud and the psychosexual development. That's something I think that most people have had a fair amount of information about. But we will talk a little bit about Erikson as well as Piaget. Erikson looks at the psychosocial development, how you interact, how do certain life events affect your personality development. Whereas Piaget is specifically looking at cognitive or learning function. And it's important to remember that, number one, children learn through play. They learn about the world around them through their interaction with it, usually through touch and their sensory systems, and that they think differently. So again, important to remember those things when you are looking at and assessing a child. There are a couple of screenings. You're certainly welcome to look at them. The one most people are familiar with is the Denver Developmental. There is an early language milestone scale that looks at how well are you speaking. There's a modified autism scale, certainly something we'll talk about a little later on when we get to some of the behavioral and genetic concerns lecture. Ages and Stages is a questionnaire that's used most often in primary care these days through the American Academy of Pediatrics. And then HEADS, which is an adolescent screening tool looking for a variety of issues that may be happening in an adolescent's world. So let's dig a little bit deeper into infant development. So infants, again, trust versus mistrust. That's their Erikson stage for that first year of life. And it's important, again, that the infant grow in a trusting environment where they know that their basic care needs of feeding and touching and holding are going to be met. And again, it's a stage where infants begin to recognize that they are separate from their caregivers. The nervous system is beginning to mature. They're beginning to have more interaction with the world. And they're also able to manage a little bit of that frustration. So it's not a bad thing sometimes to let an infant sort of cry things out as a way to sort of learn how do I self-soothe and manage some frustrations. Certainly, we want as nurses to make sure that there isn't a specific reason for the crying, but sometimes they're just frustrated, and so it's okay for that cry to help them learn to self-soothe. Again, Piaget, it's all about sensory motor. So that first few years of life, everything is about how do I interact with the world? What are my senses telling me? So in that first stage, there are sucking on things, they're putting things in their mouths, they're examining their hands and their fingers, they're beginning to imitate actions that they find. as they begin to recognize that they are separate from their caregivers or the world around them, they begin to develop separation anxiety, which is that my caregiver went away, wait, come back. And then stranger anxiety is recognizing that that person or that animal or whatever it is not part of their regular world, and so they can become fussy with that. Object permanence, really important skill to understand that things exist even if you can't see them. And we talked about that in class and gave some examples of that. We talked a lot about temperament, so take a few minutes to go back and review that. If you get some familiarity with the temperament and what are the parts of that temperament scale, it really helps you as a pediatric nurse or even as an adult nurse to have conversations about what we call goodness of fit. So here again is a listing of those levels of activity, what's their rhythm, how approachable are they happy babies, or are they kind of somewhat cranky babies, what's their sensitivity to things, how easily do they change to new situations, how distractible, how much are they going to work on something persistently. All of those things play into what that personality is going to be as they grow up through childhood and then into adulthood. And so goodness of fit, where that parent must really adapt their personality and what would be typical for them, is really important to try to match and help that child, that infant and child, begin to feel a safe place. Gross motor skills, those are the big things. So think about sitting, walking, hopping, climbing stairs, riding bicycles. Those are all gross motor skills, and they start from the head and they develop down through the neck, the shoulders, the trunks, spine, hips, and onto the legs. So again, you can't expect that an infant is going to be able to sit until they have good head control. So all of those things fall into place when you think about gross motor, starting with developing head, neck control on down to their toes. Fine motor, again, starts from the center and moves out. So again, you're going to have arm control, to have good arm control before you can have good hand-finger control. And fine motor skills are those things that deal mostly with like hands and feeding and picking up objects and so on. So again, we talked about this. I gave you a little bit of a card to try to remember some of the important pieces here. I did not show finger fisting. Most babies, when they're born, they make a fist with their thumb rotated in, but after a couple months of age, that thumb should come out, and when they make a fist, they would make it like we do as an adult with the thumb on the outside. So again, one of those key things to sort of look at when you're doing a physical exam. At 4 months, they can roll from back to side. They can grasp objects with both hands. By 5 months, they're rolling front to back and back to front, so they've got full rolling capacity. 6 months, give or take, tripod sitting. Again, 6 months is when they can hold a bottle. At 7 months, they're transferring objects from one hand to another. And around 8 months is when they sort of start to sit unsupported. So they don't need the back of a chair or a couch to sit up. They're certainly not using their hands in a tripod sit to maintain balance. You can see in the fine motor section that their hand development starts with that palmar grasp, where they're just really kind of using all their fingers and dragging it into their hand. And then they begin to have more of a raking grasp, where their kind of fingers are spread a little bit and they're still raking it into the palm. And finally, they get around 9 months that crude pincer grasp, where they can begin to pick up some of those finer things like Cheerios and raisins. Crawling, where the abdomen's off the floor, is around 9 months of age. Cruising, where they're holding on to things, is around 11 months of age. And walking independently, usually 12 to 18 months. Again, they're able to turn pages in a hard book and they are beginning to feed themselves with a spoon or other food items. So again, here's some pictures of what that head control looks like over time. We talked a little bit about that early infant, that newborn infant has really so little muscle tone and muscle strength that they can't really move much against gravity, but you can see as they get more and more head control up to 4 months of age, they just sort of tuck themselves into a nice little ball. Again, head control prone. You can see how the difference is there. Again, sitting, you can see again a 1 month old just folds right over. They have very little neck trunk control. But again, by that 4 month of age, they have good head control that they can keep that head right in midline. And they still have some curving of the back, but they are able to sit up with some support. Again, here we are with some tripod sitting at 6 to 7 months. And then finally at 8 months, you can see that they are sitting independently. So we went through those. So again, the fast way to remember this is thinking of gross motor head to toe every 3 months. Here's what they get. So 3 months, they should be able to hold their head up. 6 months, they should be able to sit pretty upright with some tripod sitting. 9 months, they should be crawling. And somewhere around 12 months or so, they should be able to walk. These are pictures of that pincer grass. So you can see a palmer grass there. You've got a crude pincer grass, and then a fine pincer grass shows up a little bit later. Language, again, initially they cry, eat, sleep, cry, poop. But if you think about what a 3 month old or so does, they do an awful lot of cooing and vocalizations. So 3 letters, think of coo for that first 3 months or so of life. As they move through, they start making raspberry sounds. They respond to their name. They'll start laughing and so forth. Then at around 6 months of age, they'll start babbling, ma, 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 da, da, da. Those words don't have any, those sounds don't have any meaning. They haven't developed the symbolism to know that Dada is their father or the father figure, Mama is the mother or the mother figure. Those connections haven't been made yet. That doesn't occur until they get to around 9 to 12 months of age, where again they begin to have that association with things that are familiar to them. So they might know the name of the dog, and so on. You'll see that there are a variety of different numbers associated with how many words or so they should know. Typically, 1 to 2 is the minimum, but certainly they may know more than that. Social development, thank goodness they begin to socialize around 2 months of age with that social smile, as parents are pretty exhausted 2 months in. And as they grow through infancy, they begin to interact more and more as long as there is interaction with adults. So again, children learn through the world around them and through interaction with the environment, and that includes people. So the more that people interact and talk to babies, the more they respond back. They'll start playing games like peekaboo. And again, that helps them understand object permanence. And we already talked a little bit about stranger and separation anxiety. So the nurse's role here is very important. You want to talk with families about that children learn through play. When we get to childhood emergencies, we'll talk more about car safety. But again, asking about what their environment's like, what's their house like, what's their heating system like, what kind of water do they have? Do they have septic tanks? All of those things become very important. And again, as we talk about in GI, we're going to look closely at their nutrition. What's their growth curve look like? Setting realistic expectations for sleep and rest and what they should expect. And then as they get further in growing up through those later months of the 12 months, discipline. Really not a time to have any significant discipline in that first year of life. But again, this is anticipatory kinds of things So it becomes important to have that conversation early on. We did the questions, and that's the end of this.